I found out I was no longer welcome in my own family through a calendar notification. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no slammed doors. Just a quiet little reminder on my phone sliding across the screen while I stood in my kitchen in Chicago barefoot on cold tile waiting for the coffee to finish dripping. Family planning call? Cancelled. That was it. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. The call had been on the calendar every Sunday morning for years. It was how my parents coordinated holidays, birthdays, church events, and the small rituals they liked to call traditions. I was always on that call, even when I was traveling for work, even when I was exhausted, even when I knew my opinions would be ignored. I stayed because staying felt easier than explaining why I might want distance. I tapped the notification, refreshed the app, then checked my email. Nothing. No explanation, no reschedule, no we'll catch you up later. Just absence. I poured my coffee and leaned against the counter, watching steam rise from the mug. The city outside my window was already awake. A bus hissed at the corner. Someone laughed on the sidewalk below. Ordinary life moved forward without noticing the small shift happening inside my chest. I told myself not to read into it. Families forget things. Technology glitches. People assume someone else has communicated. Still, my stomach tightened in that familiar way it always did when something felt off but unnamed. I opened the family group chat. The thread was active. Messages from that morning stacked neatly at the bottom. My sister Caroline was arguing about catering options for Christmas. My younger brother Mark had posted a photo of his kids with Santa. My mother had added a reminder about dietary restrictions. I scrolled back. No one had mentioned me. I typed a simple question. Hey, did the planning call get moved? The typing bubble appeared for a moment, then disappeared. I waited. Minutes passed. The coffee cooled in my hand. Finally, a message came through, not in the group chat, but directly from my father. We decided to keep things simple this year. That was all. No greeting, no punctuation beyond the period. I stared at the screen, reading the sentence again and again as if tone might eventually appear between the words. It didn't. I asked simple how. This time the response came quickly, without complications. That word landed harder than he probably intended. Or maybe exactly as he intended. Complications had always been his favorite label for me. I asked questions. I noticed patterns. I remembered things people preferred to forget. When money got tight, when paperwork appeared, when decisions needed to be justified, I was useful. When the spotlight turned warm and public, I became inconvenient. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I walked to the window and looked down at the street. A woman about my mother's age was carrying groceries, moving carefully, deliberately. I wondered who helped her when she got home. I wondered who she trusted. My phone buzzed again. This year is about peace, my father wrote. We all agreed. All. The word echoed. I hadn't been part of any agreement. I hadn't been asked. I hadn't been consulted. I had simply been removed. I sat down at the small dining table that doubled as my desk and set the phone face down. My heartbeat felt loud in the quiet apartment, not fast, heavy, like something pressing inward. For years, I had been the one who smoothed things over. The one who paid quietly when my parents' small business struggled. The one who co-signed paperwork when banks hesitated. The one who wired money late at night and never mentioned it at family dinners. I worked in corporate compliance for a healthcare firm, a job that trained me to read what wasn't said, to document patterns, to recognize when systems failed people quietly and repeatedly. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped applying those skills to my own life. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account not with panic, but with a strange detached curiosity. The dashboard loaded. There it was. The recurring transfer scheduled for 2 days from now. A large amount spelled out neatly tied to an account labeled Evergreen Holdings, my parents' company. I clicked into the transaction history, month after month, year after year. Office rent, insurance, utilities, vendor payments. All from me. I hadn't meant to look. But once I did, I couldn't stop. I pulled up the shared folder where we kept company documents. Or where we used to. My access was gone. A small message appeared on the screen. You no longer have permission to view this content. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. There it was. The quiet version of betrayal doesn't announce itself. It rearranges the furniture while you're still living in the house. I thought back to a conversation from months earlier when my father had reassured me that my financial involvement was temporary. Just until things stabilize, he'd said, his voice warm, reasonable. You're good at this stuff. You understand. I had wanted to be understood. Now, sitting alone in my apartment, uninvited to the very holiday I was still funding, I realized something with a clarity that made my hands steady instead of shake. I hadn't been included because I was family. I had been included because I was useful. My phone buzzed again, this time with a calendar invite. Christmas Eve dinner, Evergreen Residence. I opened it. My name wasn't on the guest list, but the catering invoice attached at the bottom had been forwarded to my email. I closed the laptop gently as if sudden movement might shatter something fragile in the room. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself, or defend, or ask to be let back in. I felt something colder, quieter, more dangerous. I felt awake, and somewhere beneath that calm, a question formed, slow and deliberate. What would happen if I stopped holding everything together? That was the moment the story truly began. By the time the sun climbed high enough to cut through the gray haze over Chicago, the silence from my family had hardened into something deliberate. I didn't hear from my mother. That alone told me more than any explanation could. She was the kind of woman who believed love meant smoothing edges even when those edges cut someone else. If she stayed quiet, it was because she'd been told to, or because speaking up would cost her comfort. Possibly both. I went through my workday on autopilot. Emails, compliance reports, a virtual meeting where someone misused the word transparent and no one corrected them. I nodded in the right places, spoke when expected, took notes I didn't need. On the outside, nothing had changed. On the inside, something fundamental had shifted its weight. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Caroline. She didn't say hello. Dad said you're upset. I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. I wasn't invited. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. You're reading too much into it, she wrote. This year is complicated. There was that word again. Complicated. It had become a family euphemism for inconvenience. For anything that required effort from someone other than me. I asked, did you vote on this? Her reply came slower. Dad talked it through. It wasn't personal. I didn't point out the obvious, that decisions about whether someone belongs are always personal to the person being excluded. Instead, I asked the question that had been pressing quietly at the back of my mind since morning. Why was I still sent the invoice? There was a longer pause this time. Finally, she wrote, because you usually handle those things. Usually. I closed my eyes and leaned back in my chair. The word echoed with unintended honesty. Not because I had volunteered endlessly, not because I loved planning or logistics or paying bills, but because I had been positioned over time as the solution no one needed to thank. I typed, handling them doesn't mean agreeing to be invisible. Her response was immediate and sharp. Why are you making this into a thing? It's Christmas. I didn't answer. The workday ended, but my mind stayed sharp alert in a way that felt new. I ordered takeout I barely touched and opened my laptop again, not to check my bank account this time, but to organize. I created a folder on my desktop and labeled it simply Records. Inside, I began dropping files, bank statements, wire confirmations, email chains where my father thanked me privately for covering shortfalls he never acknowledged publicly. Screenshots of invoices forwarded without context or consent. I wasn't emotional, I wasn't crying, I was methodical. Years of compliance work had taught me that truth, when laid out clearly, didn't need drama to be devastating. Halfway through organizing, I found an email from 3 years earlier. Subject line, temporary adjustment. In it, my father explained that the business had hit a rough patch and that he'd need me to cover operational costs for a little while. He'd promised we would formalize things later, maybe adjust ownership, maybe compensate me. He'd written that family didn't nickel and dime each other. I read it again this time, not as a daughter eager to help, but as a professional trained to spot red flags. There was no timeline, no terms, no acknowledgement of risk, just trust and obligation. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail from my mother. I didn't play it right away. I finished organizing first, creating subfolders, labeling dates, adding notes. Only when everything felt contained did I press play. Her voice was soft, careful. Honey, your father said there was some confusion today. I just wanted to check in. Christmas is always stressful and sometimes feelings get hurt. Maybe we can all talk and clear the air. Clear the air. Another phrase designed to make harm feel like a misunderstanding. She didn't ask how I felt. She didn't ask what decision had been made without me. She asked for peace the way she always did, as if peace were a shared responsibility, instead of something extracted from the quietest person in the room. I didn't call her back. Instead, I opened the invoice that had been forwarded to me. Catering, a large amount, due immediately. At the bottom of the email, a note from Caroline's dad said, "You're good for it." I laughed once, a short, humorless sound that surprised me. That night I slept lightly, not restlessly, lightly, like someone who knows something is coming and is conserving energy. The next morning, an automated email arrived from the bank reminding me of the upcoming transfer to Evergreen Holdings. The tone was polite, neutral, unaware of the shift happening behind the scenes. I opened the transfer details and hovered over the cancel button. I didn't click it, not yet. Instead, I did something I hadn't done before. I scheduled an appointment. A lawyer recommended by a colleague who knew how to keep things discreet. I didn't explain much in the email, just that I needed advice on financial entanglement with family and business obligations. The appointment was set for the following afternoon. When I closed my laptop, I felt something settle into place. Not anger, not revenge. Alignment. Later that day, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was curt, controlled. "We need to talk about your attitude. This isn't how family behaves." I saved it. Not because I needed proof of cruelty, but because documentation I'd learned was a form of self-respect. That evening, Caroline texted again. "Are you really going to do this?" I asked, "Do what?" "Make things difficult." I didn't respond. I watched the city lights come on outside my window and realized something that felt both small and enormous. They were afraid, not of losing me, of losing what I provided. And for the first time, that knowledge didn't make me feel sad. It made me feel free. I closed my phone, poured a glass of water, and sat in the quiet. Tomorrow I would ask questions I should have asked years ago. Tomorrow I would stop assuming silence meant consent. Tomorrow the balance would begin to shift, and they wouldn't see it coming. The law office sat on the 5th floor of a building most people never noticed. No polished marble, no dramatic views, just beige carpet, muted lighting, and the low hum of professionalism. The kind of place where people came when they were done explaining themselves to family and ready to speak in facts. I arrived 10 minutes early and sat with my coat folded neatly on my lap, watching the second hand of a wall clock move in steady, unbothered circles. My pulse matched it. Calm, even. That alone felt like a warning sign that something inside me had already crossed a line I couldn't uncross. When the attorney called my name, I stood and followed her into a small office with framed certificates and a window overlooking a brick alley. Her name was Rachel Collins, early 50s, clear eyes, the kind of woman who listened without nodding too much. She didn't ask me how I felt. She asked, "What are you paying for?" I told her, not in a rush, not with emphasis, just the numbers. Rent for office space, insurance premiums, vendor invoices, emergency transfers when payroll ran short, years of them. She asked, "What do you own?" I paused. "Nothing," I said. She nodded once as if confirming something she already suspected. "Are there written agreements?" "No." "Any equity?" "No." "Any compensation beyond vague promises?" "No." She folded her hands and leaned back slightly. "Then what you have is not a family arrangement. It's an informal financing structure with no protections." She let that sit. I didn't argue. She continued, "Which means you can stop at any time, legally, immediately, but you should be aware of what happens next." I waited. "When the payments stop," she said, "someone else has to step in. If they don't, consequences follow. Credit, contracts, reputation, sometimes all three." I thought of my father, so careful about appearances, so careless about foundations. Rachel looked at me steadily. "Do you want out clean, or do you want leverage?" The question landed softly, but it changed the air in the room. "I want my life back," I said. "That usually comes with leverage," she replied. She pulled a legal pad toward her and began outlining options. Formal withdrawal notices, documentation of past payments, letters to vendors clarifying responsibility, a possible demand for reimbursement if I chose to pursue it. She didn't push me toward revenge. She didn't soften the impact. She simply explained how power worked when emotions were removed. Before I left, she said something that stayed with me. "People confuse generosity with obligation. The law does not." I walked out of the building into cold afternoon air and felt lighter than I had in weeks. On my phone, 3 missed calls from my father. 1 from Caroline, none from my mother. I didn't return them. That night, I drafted a single email. Not to my family. To Evergreen Holdings accountant. I wrote that effective immediately, I would no longer be covering operational expenses. That all invoices, utilities, and vendor communications should be directed to the company's registered owners. I kept the tone professional, neutral, impossible to argue with. I scheduled it to send the next morning. Then I slept. Deeply. The next day, the shift began. It started with a call from the accountant, confusion in his voice, then another from a vendor asking about an unpaid invoice, then a sharply worded email from Caroline. What did you do? I replied with one sentence. I stopped doing what I never agreed to do forever. My father called again. This time I answered. His voice was tight, controlled, strained under the weight of something slipping. You blindsided us, he said. I informed you, I replied, in writing. This affects everyone, he snapped. It already did, I said. Silence stretched between us. Then colder, you're being selfish. I didn't rise to it. I'm being accurate. He hung up. By evening, my mother finally texted. This is tearing the family apart. I looked at the message for a long time before typing back. It was already torn. I just stopped holding the pieces together. That night, as the city settled into darkness, I opened my laptop and began preparing the next step. Not out of anger, out of clarity. Because once you see the structure you've been trapped inside, you don't negotiate with it. You dismantle it, quietly, legally, and without asking permission. The first real crack didn't come from my parents. It came from the silence that followed. No calls for 2 days, no accusations, no emotional appeals dressed up as concern. Just an absence so deliberate it felt like strategy. I recognized it immediately. My family's favorite move had never been confrontation. It was withdrawal. Make the problem feel isolated long enough, and eventually it would come crawling back to restore balance. They expected me to flinch. I didn't. Instead, I kept working. I showed up to meetings. I submitted reports. I answered questions with the same steady voice I always used. If anything, I was sharper, focused, like a system freed from background noise. On the third day, the email arrived. It was from Evergreen Holdings' landlord. Subject line: urgent lease payment status. I opened it slowly, already knowing what it would say. The last transfer hadn't gone through. The grace period was short. Late fees were accumulating. I forwarded the message to my father without comment. He replied within minutes. Why are you forwarding this to me? I stared at the screen, then typed. Because it's not my lease. The response came back almost immediately. This is unbelievable. I didn't reply. I let the truth do the work. That afternoon, Caroline showed up at my apartment. She didn't call first. She never did when she wanted the upper hand. She knocked sharply the way people do when they expect to be let in. When I opened the door, she was already mid-sentence. You've completely lost perspective. I stepped aside and let her in without a word. She paced my living room, arms crossed, eyes scanning the space like she was searching for evidence of some dramatic downfall. When she didn't find it, her irritation deepened. You're really okay with this? She demanded, letting everything fall apart. I sat down slowly on the edge of the sofa. I'm not letting anything fall apart, I said. I'm stepping out of something that was never mine to hold. She scoffed. You always do this. You make things about principles instead of people. I looked at her calmly. I'm finally making it about reality. She stopped pacing. Dad is under a lot of pressure, she said. You know how he gets. I did know. He got angry. He got loud. He got righteous. And when none of that worked, he got cruel. That doesn't make it my responsibility, I said. She shook her head, frustrated. You don't understand what this is doing to Mom. I met her eyes. I do. I just refuse to keep sacrificing myself so she doesn't have to feel uncomfortable. That landed harder than I expected. Caroline's mouth opened, then closed. For a brief moment, I saw something flicker behind her defensiveness, not empathy, calculation. If you don't fix this, she said carefully, there are going to be consequences. I nodded once. I'm aware. She left shortly after, slamming the door just hard enough to make a point. That evening, my father finally sent something longer than a sentence. It was an email, formal, almost rehearsed. He wrote about loyalty, about family legacy, about everything he had built from nothing. He accused me of rewriting history, of exaggerating my contributions, of acting entitled. He ended by saying he expected me to resume payments immediately while we worked things out. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Rachel. Her reply came an hour later. Do not respond emotionally. If you respond at all, keep it factual, and only if it serves you. I closed the email and didn't answer. The next morning, I received a notification from my bank. Evergreen Holdings account was overdrawn. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, it was confirmation. The structure I had been propping up was fragile by design. It depended on one quiet person absorbing all the shock. Without me, the truth surfaced fast. By the end of the week, vendors were calling my personal number. Some angry, some confused. One threatened legal action. I gave them all the same response. I am not an owner. I am not an officer. I am not responsible. I documented every call, every email, every attempt to pull me back in. On Friday afternoon, my mother finally called. Her voice was strained thin. Your father says you're trying to punish him. I'm not, I said gently. I'm just not protecting him anymore. There was a long pause. He's saying terrible things, she whispered. I know. He says you're ungrateful, that you've always been cold. I closed my eyes for a moment. He's allowed to believe that, I said. I'm allowed to stop funding it. She started to cry then, softly, the way she always did when the truth edged too close to her own choices. I don't know how to fix this, she said. I didn't rush to reassure her. You don't have to, I replied. You just have to stop asking me to. When we hung up, the apartment felt very quiet. Not empty, clear. That night, I sat at my desk and drafted one more document, a formal notice of financial disengagement. It listed dates, amounts, responsibilities. It stated plainly that any future obligations incurred by Evergreen Holdings were not mine. I printed it, signed it, scanned it. Then I sent copies to my father, the accountant, and the company's legal contact. I didn't add a message. I didn't explain. The next morning, I woke to a string of missed calls and one voicemail from my father. His voice was different this time. Lower, tighter. This is a mistake, he said. You think you're in control, but you're not. You're going to regret this. I deleted the voicemail without saving it, because for the first time, his fear was louder than my guilt. And that told me everything I needed to know. The escalation had begun. Not with shouting, not with tears, but with paperwork. And I was ready. The retaliation didn't come as rage. It came as paperwork. On Monday morning, I opened my email to a subject line that made my breath pause for half a second longer than usual. Notice of breach. It was from Evergreen Holdings attorney, not one I recognized. New name, new firm, expensive letterhead embedded into the PDF like a warning label. I didn't open it right away. I made coffee first. I stood at the counter while it brewed, listening to the low mechanical whir, grounding myself in the ordinary. Years ago, moments like this would have sent me spiraling. Now they made me methodical. When I finally opened the attachment, I read it slowly the way Rachel had taught me. The letter accused me of abandoning financial obligations. It claimed my withdrawal had caused damages. It suggested that my actions were retaliatory and emotionally motivated. It ended with a demand resume payments immediately or face legal action. I didn't react. I forwarded it to Rachel. Her reply came less than an hour later. This is intimidation, not substance. They're hoping fear will restore compliance. I felt something loosen in my chest. Rachel followed up with a phone call. Her voice was steady, unhurried. They have no contract, she said. No written obligation, no ownership transfer, no compensation agreement. This letter is theater. I asked, should I respond? Not yet, she said. Silence is appropriate here. Silence. It used to terrify me. In my family, silence meant punishment. It meant cold shoulders and withheld affection. It meant I had failed some unspoken test. Now it meant restraint. That afternoon, my brother Mark called. We hadn't spoken in weeks. He sounded awkward, unsure which role he was supposed to play. I just wanted to check in, he said. Things are kind of tense. I waited. Dad says you're taking this too far, he continued. He's saying you're trying to control everyone. I almost smiled. I stopped controlling things, I said. That's the problem. Mark sighed. You know how he is. Yes, I said quietly, I do. There was a pause. Then softer, Mom's really stressed. I closed my eyes. I'm not the solution to that, I replied. When the call ended, I sat in my living room and noticed something subtle. I wasn't bracing anymore. The next move came 2 days later. A certified letter arrived at my apartment. I recognized my father's handwriting immediately. Tight, pressed, like he was carving words instead of writing them. Inside was a formal demand for reimbursement. He claimed that my payments over the years had been voluntary gifts, that I had offered them freely, that my current refusal constituted bad faith. I read it once, then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was desperate. I scanned the letter and added it to my growing folder. Then I did something I hadn't expected. I pulled my credit report. Clean, strong. Every on-time payment, every account pristine. All the risk had flowed one way. That night I met Rachel again. She reviewed the new letter and nodded. They're trying to rewrite the narrative, she said. That's common when people realize they're exposed. What happens next, I asked. She leaned back in her chair. Next, they either escalate publicly or implode privately. I thought of my father's obsession with image. I know which one he'll choose, I said. Rachel nodded, which means you need to be prepared. She slid a document across the desk. A timeline. Every payment I had made, every email, every invoice, organized, annotated, unemotional. This is your shield, she said. Facts don't argue, they just stand there. The next morning, the first public move happened. Caroline tagged me in a post on social media. It was subtle, passive-aggressive, carefully worded. She wrote about family loyalty, about how money changes people, about how some individuals confuse independence with abandonment. She didn't name me. She didn't have to. The comments filled quickly. Friends, extended relatives, people who had never asked where the money came from, but had always assumed my parents were self-made. I didn't respond. Instead, I watched. By evening, my father shared the post. He added his own caption. Heartbroken when your own child turns against you. That was the moment I felt something go completely still inside me. Not anger, not sadness, certainty. I called Rachel. It's going public, I said. I expected that, she replied. The question is whether you want to correct the record. I looked at the screen at the careful lie unfolding in real time. Yes, I said, but not emotionally. She paused. Then we do it clean, she said, and only once. We drafted a statement together. Short, factual, unassailable. I posted it the next morning. I didn't accuse. I didn't insult. I listed dates, amounts, roles. I stated that I had been the sole financial contributor to Evergreen Holdings for several years, that I was not an owner, that I had withdrawn support after being excluded from family decisions while still being expected to fund them. I ended with one sentence. I'm choosing clarity over silence. Then I logged out. The fallout was immediate. Some messages were cruel, accusations of betrayal, of greed, of airing dirty laundry. Others were quieter. Private messages, apologies, questions. One from a distant aunt stood out. I always wondered how your parents managed. I guess now I know. By the end of the day, my father called again. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. This time there was no rage, only strain. You've embarrassed us, he said. You didn't have to do this. I deleted it. Because the truth didn't embarrass him. Exposure did. That night I sat alone in my apartment, the city humming softly outside. For the first time since this began, I understood the real cost of silence. It wasn't peace, it was erasure, and I was done paying for it. The morning after I posted the statement, my phone stayed quiet in a way that felt unnatural. No messages, no calls, no notifications stacked on top of each other like the day before. It was as if someone had turned down the volume on my life without asking first. I noticed it while brushing my teeth, pausing with the toothbrush still in my mouth, listening to the apartment hum. Refrigerator, distant traffic, the ordinary sounds that reminded me the world hadn't stopped just because my family's version of me had cracked. I went to work early that day. Not because I had to, but because routine felt grounding. The lobby of my office building smelled faintly of burnt coffee and cleaning solution. Familiar, safe. I nodded at the security guard, took the elevator up, and settled into my desk like nothing was wrong. By mid-morning, the silence broke. An email from Human Resources. Subject line: request for clarification. My stomach tightened, but only briefly. I opened it and read carefully. HR explained that they had received an inquiry regarding my involvement in a family-owned business and wanted to ensure there was no conflict of interest related to my role in compliance. I closed my eyes for a moment. Of course my father would go there. He couldn't control the narrative at home anymore, so he had reached for the one place where rules mattered more than relationships. He was counting on the idea that even a hint of impropriety would scare me into retreat. He didn't understand that this was the one arena where I was strongest. I replied with calm precision. I explained that I had no ownership stake, no decision-making authority, and no ongoing financial involvement. I attached documentation, dates, bank records, withdrawal notices, everything neatly labeled. I ended by offering to meet in person if they needed further clarification. Within an hour, HR wrote back, "Thank you for the thorough documentation. No further action required." I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. That was when the anger finally came. Not loud, not explosive, just a low, steady heat under my ribs. My father hadn't just tried to shame me publicly. He had tried to threaten my livelihood, the job I had built on my own. the one thing in my life that had never belonged to him. That changed something. That afternoon, Rachel called me. They contacted your employer, she said, not asking, just confirming. Yes. Her tone hardened. That crosses a line. What does that mean legally? I asked. It means we stop being reactive, she said, and start being proactive. We met the next morning. She laid out the options without drama. A cease and desist letter addressing defamation and interference. A formal demand to stop contacting third parties about me. A record that could be used later if things escalated further. This isn't revenge, she said, it's containment. I signed the authorization without hesitation. By the end of the day, the letter was sent. My father responded the only way he knew how. He exploded. Voicemail after voicemail filled my phone. His voice cracked between fury and disbelief. How dare you? You're ruining everything. You think you're smarter than everyone else. You wouldn't exist without me. I listened to one, then another. By the third, I stopped. I archived them all without responding. Caroline texted that night. You've gone too far. Dad's talking about cutting you out completely. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Cutting me out of what exactly? The money I had already stopped giving. The holidays I was no longer invited to. The family narrative that never included me honestly. I replied with one sentence. I've already stepped away. She didn't answer. 2 days later, my mother showed up. I wasn't expecting her. I saw her through the peephole first, standing in the hallway with her purse clutched too tightly, her shoulders slightly hunched. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the weight she'd avoided for years had finally found her. I opened the door and stepped aside without speaking. She sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, eyes fixed on the surface, like it might give her instructions. He's not sleeping, she said finally. I waited. He says you've betrayed him, that you've always resented him. I poured us both water and set the glasses down gently. Did you know he contacted my employer? I asked. Her head snapped up. What? He tried to make it look like I was unethical, that I had hidden interests. He tried to put my job at risk. Her mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time, she looked genuinely shaken. I didn't know, she whispered. I believe you, I said. She exhaled sharply, relief flickering across her face, followed by something else, fear. He doesn't see it that way, she said. He thinks you're attacking him. I'm protecting myself, I replied. There's a difference. She stared at her hands. I wish you'd just talk to him, she said softly. I shook my head. He doesn't want a conversation. He wants control. The word landed between us, heavy and undeniable. She didn't argue. Instead, she did something she had never done before. She asked quietly, when did this start? I thought about it, really thought. Long before the money, I said. The money just made it visible. She nodded slowly, as if a puzzle piece had finally slid into place. When she left, she didn't hug me. She didn't ask for reassurance. She just paused at the door and said, I don't know what happens next. Neither do I replied, but I know what doesn't. That night I sat alone on my couch, the city lights reflecting faintly off the window. I felt tired, but not hollow. Worn, but not weak. The retaliation had failed. The threats had failed. And in their place was something new. Leverage. Because when someone tries to destroy your stability and fails, they show you exactly how afraid they are. And fear, when exposed, stops being dangerous. It becomes predictable. And I was done being surprised. The cease and desist letter did what it was supposed to do. It didn't make my father apologize. It didn't make him reflective or remorseful or suddenly self-aware. It did something far more important. It slowed him down. For the first time since this began, his silence wasn't strategic. It was cautious. No calls, no emails, no indirect messages through Caroline or Mark. Even the vague social media posts stopped. The public narrative he had tried to build stalled mid-sentence, like a story abandoned, when the audience started asking uncomfortable questions. I noticed the change immediately. People like my father thrived on momentum, on pressure, on overwhelming others until they folded just to make the noise stop. When that didn't work, he had nothing prepared. I used the quiet. Rachel and I met again, this time not to respond to a threat, but to plan. She spread documents across the table in front of us. Not legal complaints, not lawsuits, information. You have leverage. Most people don't realize they have, she said. Not just financially, logistically. She pointed to a section in the documents. Evergreen Holdings insurance policies, she continued. Several are tied to your payment history. The underwriters approved coverage based on demonstrated cash flow, your cash flow. I felt something shift in my chest. So what happens when that changes? She met my eyes. The risk profile changes. Premiums increase. Coverage gets reviewed, sometimes pulled. I nodded slowly. This isn't something you announce, she said. It's something that happens quietly when reality catches up. The phrase stuck with me. Reality catching up. For years, my family had lived in a version of reality subsidized by my silence. Now that silence was gone and the system was correcting itself. That afternoon, I received an email from the insurance broker. Routine review, they called it. I forwarded it to Rachel. She smiled when she read it. They're already noticing. That night, I dreamed of a house I didn't recognize collapsing inward room by room, not violently, but neatly. Like something designed to fall once the supports were removed. I woke up calm. The next escalation came from an unexpected place. My grandmother. She called me late one evening, her voice sharp despite her age. I don't understand what you think you're doing, she said without preamble. I hadn't spoken to her in months. I'm protecting myself, I replied evenly. She scoffed. From your own family? Yes. She sighed, a sound heavy with disappointment. Your father says you've turned cold. That money has changed you. I almost laughed. Money didn't change me, I said. It just revealed what everyone expected from me. There was a pause. And what about loyalty, she asked. I thought carefully before answering. Loyalty that only flows one way isn't loyalty, I said. It's control. She didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was quieter. You sound very sure. I am. The call ended shortly after. No resolution, no blessing, but no threats either. I added it to the record. 2 days later, Mark texted me. I didn't know you were paying for all of it. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I replied, neither did anyone else. He didn't respond. Later that week, a vendor emailed me directly, not to demand payment, to apologize. He wrote that there had been confusion about responsibility, that he hadn't realized I wasn't an owner, that he hoped there were no hard feelings. I closed the email and sat back, the weight of it settling slowly. The narrative was changing, not because I forced it, because it couldn't survive scrutiny. On Friday, I received a notification that Evergreen Holdings' business credit line had been frozen pending review. The language was dry, administrative, unemotional. I didn't forward it. I didn't need to. By that point, my father knew. That night, he finally called again. I let it ring. Then I answered. His voice was lower than I expected, controlled but strained at the edges. You've made your point, he said. I didn't make a point, I replied. I made a decision. You didn't have to do it this way. This was the only way you noticed. Silence. Then carefully, what do you want? The question was wrong. I corrected it. This isn't a negotiation. His breath caught audibly. I'm not resuming payments, I continued. I'm not managing fallout, and I'm not fixing the consequences of choices I didn't make. You're tearing the family apart, he said, the old refrain worn thin. I spoke slowly. No, I stopped holding it together alone. There was nothing left for him to say. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, phone resting loosely in my hand. I didn't feel victorious. I felt done. The next morning, I took a walk through my neighborhood. The air was cool, the sky pale and open. I passed a woman walking her dog, a couple arguing softly on a bench, a man unlocking his bike. Ordinary lives. Unentangled. For the first time, I understood that revenge didn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looked like stepping back and letting the truth do what it always does when it's no longer suppressed. It reorganizes everything, and the people who depended on your silence feel it first. The first apology didn't come from my father. It came from someone I barely expected to hear from at all. My Aunt Deborah emailed me on a Sunday afternoon, the subject line, empty the body short. I didn't know. I should have asked questions. I'm sorry. I read it twice. Not because it was profound, but because it was rare. In my family, ignorance had always been treated as innocence. Deborah's message didn't hide behind that. She admitted the gap. She named it. I replied with a single sentence. Thank you for saying that. I didn't invite a conversation. I didn't reopen wounds. I acknowledged the moment and let it pass. That was the pattern I was learning to trust. Not every door needed to be reopened just because someone finally knocked. Over the next week, the fallout took a quieter shape. Fewer explosions, more leaks. Evergreen Holdings missed a payment on one of its smaller vendor contracts. Not catastrophic, but noticeable. The vendor sent a polite but firm notice copied to multiple parties. This time, my name wasn't on it. I noticed that more than anything else. For years, every problem had somehow landed in my inbox. Now the system was correcting its aim. Caroline tried again, this time with a softer approach. She invited me to coffee. I agreed, not because I missed her, but because I wanted to see who she was when leverage no longer worked. We met at a cafe halfway between our apartments, neutral territory. She arrived early, already seated, stirring a cup she hadn't touched. "You look different," she said as I sat down. "So do you," I replied. She smiled tightly. "I didn't realize how much pressure you were under," she began. "We all just assumed you had it handled." I waited. "That's not fair," she added quickly. "I know that now." I nodded once. But she continued, "And there it was. You didn't have to blow everything up." I looked at her carefully. "What exactly did I blow up?" She hesitated. "The business, Dad's reputation, Mom's sense of stability." I took a sip of water. "I didn't take any of those things," I said calmly. "I stopped paying for them." She frowned. "You're splitting hairs." "No," I said, "I'm naming reality." She leaned back, arms crossing defensively. "You always do that," she said. "You make things sound so clean." "They are clean," I replied. "They're just uncomfortable." Her jaw tightened. "Do you even care what this is doing to him?" I met her eyes. "I care enough not to lie anymore." She didn't have an answer for that. When we parted, there was no hug, no promise to stay in touch. Just a quiet understanding that whatever sibling bond we had once claimed was built on imbalance, and imbalance doesn't survive correction. That evening, my mother called again. This time, her voice was steadier. "Your father's talking about selling," she said. I leaned against the kitchen counter, absorbing that. "The business?" I asked. "The office space." "Maybe more," she replied. "He says it's temporary." Temporary. The word families use when permanence is too frightening to name. "I'm telling you because I don't want you blindsided," she added. I appreciated that, genuinely. "Thank you," I said. There was a pause. "He still thinks you owe him an apology." I almost smiled. "I'm sure he does." She sighed. "I don't know where this leaves us." I thought about that carefully before answering. "I think it leaves us honest," I said, for the first time. She didn't disagree. A few days later, Rachel forwarded me an update. Evergreen Holdings insurer had adjusted their coverage. Premiums increased, certain protections reduced. All routine, all justified. Rachel's note was brief. "This is what accountability looks like." The phrase stayed with me. Accountability. Not punishment, not revenge, just consequences arriving on time. That Friday night, I received a text from Mark. "I should have spoken up sooner." I replied, "You can still choose how you show up now." He didn't answer, but the message stayed read. That was enough. The strangest part of all of this wasn't the chaos on my family's side. It was the calm on mine. My apartment felt larger. My weekends felt longer. My thoughts were my own again. I started sleeping through the night without waking to phantom notifications. I stopped bracing before opening emails. One evening, I sat on my couch with a book I'd been meaning to read for months and realized something that made me laugh softly to myself. I had been so busy holding everything together that I had forgotten what it felt like to simply exist without obligation. The next escalation came quietly. A letter arrived from my father's attorney, not threatening this time, inviting. They wanted to discuss mutual resolution. I forwarded it to Rachel. Her response came quickly. "They're running out of leverage." I stared at the letter, then at my reflection in the dark window beside my desk. For years, I had believed resolution meant reconciliation. Now I understood something deeper. Resolution meant alignment between truth and action. I wrote back through Rachel. Any discussion would be in writing. Any claims would require documentation. Any expectation of future support was off the table. The response came the next day. They agreed. That was when I knew. The power dynamic had fully reversed. Not because I had taken anything from them, but because I had finally stopped giving what was never supposed to be theirs. And once you do that, people are forced to meet you where you actually stand, not where they were comfortable placing you. The meeting happened on a Wednesday afternoon over email. No conference room, no raised voices, no one looking each other in the eye and pretending this was about healing. Just words, documents, timestamps. Rachel handled the correspondence, looping me in only when something required my confirmation. I read everything carefully the way I always had when consequences mattered. My father's attorney outlined their position first. They acknowledged that I was not legally obligated to continue payments. That part was brief, almost begrudging. Then they pivoted. They proposed a family resolution suggesting I accept a partial reimbursement plan over time in exchange for signing a release stating that I would not pursue further claims or make additional disclosures about Evergreen Holdings' finances. It was an attempt to buy silence. I felt no rush to respond. Rachel wrote back the next morning. My position was simple. I would not accept reimbursement tied to silence. I would not sign a release that rewrote history. I would not resume financial involvement in any form. However, I was willing to formally document my past contributions, have them acknowledged in writing, and agree that the matter was closed once the business was fully disentangled from me. No money demanded, no apology required, just truth on paper. There was a long pause after that. 2 days passed, then 3. On the 4th day, my mother called. She didn't sound panicked this time. She sounded tired in a way that felt older than her years. "He's angry," she said, "but he's listening." That was new. "He says you're being unreasonable," she added almost reflexively. Then she stopped herself. "I don't think he knows what reasonable looks like anymore." I let that sit. "He's afraid," she continued. "Not of losing the business, of losing how people see him." I closed my eyes. "I know," she hesitated. "If he agrees to your terms, what then?" I thought about it, really thought. "Then we move on," I said, "separately." She didn't argue. That evening, Rachel forwarded the response. They accepted. Not warmly, not graciously, but clearly. A written acknowledgement would be drafted, stating that I had been the sole financial contributor to Evergreen Holdings during the relevant period, that no ownership interest had been granted, and that my withdrawal was lawful and final. No reimbursement, no future obligations, no gag clause. Just a record. I read the draft slowly, line by line. My name appeared in black and white, attached to facts instead of expectations. I approved it. The document was signed 3 days later. When Rachel emailed me the executed copy, I sat very still at my desk, hands folded, reading it again. It wasn't vindication I felt. It was release. For the first time, there was a version of this story that didn't rely on my memory or my restraint. It existed outside of me, now immune to revision. That night, my father called. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. His voice was flat, controlled, empty of performance. "I signed the papers," he said. "I hope you're satisfied." I deleted the message, because satisfaction had never been the goal. The next day, I received a message from Caroline. I didn't realize he'd admitted in writing. Neither had she. That was the thing about people who build their authority on silence. They underestimate what happens when silence is removed from the equation. Over the following weeks, the ripple effects continued, quieter now, but no less real. Evergreen Holdings downsized. Staff hours were cut. The office space was listed for sublease. My father stopped posting online entirely. The family group chat went dormant. No announcements, no holiday planning, no passive-aggressive jokes. Just nothing. At first, the emptiness felt strange, then it felt clean. One afternoon, Mark called. He didn't apologize, he didn't explain. He just said, "I'm trying to figure out who I am without Dad's version of things." I respected that more than any apology. "I hope you do," I said. That was all. On a quiet Sunday morning, I sat at my kitchen table with coffee and reread the document one last time. Then I filed it away, closed the folder, and shut my laptop. The story was finished. Not because everyone agreed, but because I no longer needed them to. I stepped outside and walked through my neighborhood. The air crisp, the sky open. I passed families, couples, people, moving forward in small, unremarkable ways. Life didn't look different. I did. I had learned something that no one in my family had ever taught me. Love without boundaries isn't love. Generosity without choice isn't generosity. And peace that requires self-erasure isn't peace at all. The revenge wasn't loud. It didn't destroy anyone. It simply removed the illusion that had kept me small. And once that illusion was gone, there was nothing left to fight. Only space. Only direction. Only my life finally facing forward. The silence after the papers were signed felt heavier than anything that came before. Not hostile, not tense. Final. There were no more threats because there was nothing left to threaten me with. No more bargaining because there was nothing I wanted from them. Even the background noise of obligation had gone quiet, like a machine finally powered down after running for years without maintenance. I expected to feel relief. What I felt instead was disorientation. For most of my adult life, my choices had been shaped around managing fallout, anticipating moods, preventing crises. Now there was nothing to manage, no one to placate, no invisible list of responsibilities humming in the back of my mind. It took a few days to realize how deeply that role had been wired into me. On Monday morning, I reached for my phone, automatically checking for missed calls that weren't there. On Tuesday, I caught myself drafting an email in my head to warn my father about a deadline that was no longer mine to track. On Wednesday, I stopped halfway through and laughed softly at myself. This was what withdrawal looked like. Not dramatic, awkward. At work, my manager commented that I seemed lighter, more present. I didn't tell her why. I didn't need to. The change didn't require explanation. Midweek, I received a letter forwarded by Rachel. It was administrative. Evergreen Holdings had formally removed my name from any internal documentation. Not because they were generous, but because they had to. The systems were being corrected, slowly, reluctantly. I signed nothing. I owed nothing. That Thursday evening, my mother called. She didn't mention this business, or the papers, or my father's anger. She talked about the weather, about a neighbor's dog, about a recipe she couldn't quite get right anymore. It felt like talking to someone standing in the aftermath of a storm trying to describe the broken pieces without naming the cause. "I'm thinking of selling the house," she said quietly, halfway through the call. I leaned back against the couch, absorbing that. "Do you want to?" I asked. She was silent for a long moment. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't think I've ever asked myself that." The honesty in her voice startled me more than anything else she could have said. "You're allowed to," I replied. She didn't respond, but her breathing changed, slower, deeper. When we hung up, I sat there thinking about all the ways people learn to disappear inside other people's choices. How easy it is to confuse endurance with love. That weekend, I drove out of the city for the first time in months. No destination, just open road. I let the radio play quietly and watched the skyline shrink in the rearview mirror. For years, my life had been oriented towards something behind me: family, history, obligation. Now there was only forward. On the drive back, I passed a billboard advertising estate planning. The words will and trust caught my attention. Not because of inheritance, but because of intention. I realized something quietly profound. My father had spent his life trying to control the story people told about him. I was finally writing one for myself. The next message came from Caroline. Short, careful. "Dad's been asking if you'll come to Thanksgiving." I stared at the screen, the words oddly weightless. Not an apology, not accountability, an invitation as if nothing had happened. I typed a response, then deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. In the end, I wrote no, nothing else. She replied a minute later. "Can I ask why?" I waited before answering. "Because I don't go where my presence is optional, but my usefulness is assumed." There was no response after that. The weeks passed quietly. No holidays, no group chats, no shared plans. I spent Thanksgiving with friends, people who knew me as I was, not as a role. We cooked together, laughed, talked about ordinary things. No one asked me to fix anything. At one point, sitting at the table, I felt a wave of emotion rise unexpectedly. Not grief, recognition. This was what belonging felt like, without strings. When I got home that night, I stood by the window and looked out at the city lights. I thought about the woman I had been at the beginning of this story. The one who accepted silence as love, who confused endurance with loyalty. I wished I could reach back and tell her one thing: you don't owe people access to you just because they share your name. The next morning, I woke up without checking my phone. That was how I knew the transformation was real. Because the most powerful revenge wasn't taking something back. It was no longer needing to look over my shoulder to see who might demand it. And in that quiet, unclaimed space, I finally understood something simple and unshakable. I wasn't rebuilding my life. I was starting it. The holidays passed without incident. That in itself felt surreal. No last-minute emergencies, no guilt-laced phone calls, no sudden, "we just need a little help" requests disguised as family updates. December arrived and moved through my life like any other month, quiet and unremarkable. And I realized how much energy I had once spent bracing for chaos that never actually belonged to me. By mid-December, the city was wrapped in lights and routine. Office parties, end-of-year deadlines, the low, constant buzz of people rushing to finish things they'd been putting off. I participated where I wanted, declined where I didn't, and noticed how rarely anyone questioned my choices when I stopped over-explaining them. One afternoon, a package arrived at my door. The return address was my mother's. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the kitchen counter and went about my evening. Made dinner, took a shower, let the day drain out of me slowly. When I finally sliced the tape, I did it with care, like handling something fragile that might not break but still deserved caution. Inside was a small wooden box. I recognized it immediately. It had belonged to my grandmother. She used to keep important papers in it: birth certificates, old letters, the kind of objects people hold on to when they're afraid of losing proof of where they came from. There was a note tucked inside. "I think this should be with you now." No apology, no explanation, just a quiet transfer of something symbolic. I ran my fingers along the worn edge of the box and felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness, understanding. That night, my mother called. She sounded steadier than she had in weeks. "I'm staying with my sister for a while," she said. "Just to think." I didn't ask about my father. I didn't need to. "I'm glad you're giving yourself space," I replied. There was a pause. "I should have protected you," she said softly. "A long time ago." The words hung between us, fragile and real. "I know," I said, and for the first time that was enough. After we hung up, I sat with the box open on my lap. Inside were documents I had never seen before, old photographs, letters written in a careful hand, proof of lives lived quietly, sacrifices made without applause. I realized then that the pattern in my family didn't start with my father. It had just intensified with him. I closed the box and set it beside my bed. In the following days, something unexpected happened. I felt grief, not the sharp kind, the slow kind. The kind that comes when you finally stop hoping someone will become who you needed them to be. I let it pass through me without fighting it. I didn't call my father, he didn't call me. Rachel checked in once, just to confirm everything remained settled. "It's over," she said simply. I believed her. On Christmas morning, I woke early. The city was quiet the way it always is before people start moving toward each other. I made coffee and sat by the window watching light creep slowly across the buildings. I thought about how many Christmas mornings I had spent anxious, waiting for something to go wrong. A comment, a request, a subtle reminder of where I stood. This time there was nothing waiting, and in that emptiness there was peace. Around noon, a message came from Mark. "Merry Christmas. I hope you're okay." I replied, "I am." That was all. Later that day, I went for a walk. Snow dusted the sidewalks. Children dragged sleds behind them. Someone waved at me from across the street, a neighbor whose name I barely knew, but who smiled anyway. I realized how much of my life I had lived under observation, measured, assessed. Now I was just another person walking through a winter afternoon. That evening, as I prepared a simple dinner for myself, my phone buzzed one last time. A message from Caroline. "I don't know if I'll ever understand your choices, but I see now that you weren't wrong." I read it carefully. Then I replied, "You don't have to understand them. You just have to respect them." She didn't respond. I didn't expect her to. As the year drew to a close, I felt something settle that had been restless in me for decades. Not happiness. Integrity. The alignment between what I knew to be true and how I lived. I went to bed that night without setting an alarm. The next chapter of my life didn't need one. Because when you stop orbiting other people's gravity, you don't crash. You level out, and in that steady space, you finally have room to become who you were always meant to be. The new year arrived quietly. No countdowns, no dramatic resolutions scribbled on paper and forgotten by February. Just a slow turning, like a door finally closing without slamming. On the first workday of January, I sat at my desk early, the office still half empty. Outside the window, Chicago looked washed clean, pale winter light reflecting off glass and steel. I opened my planner and stared at the blank pages ahead of me longer than necessary. For the first time, there was nothing I needed to brace for. No family emergencies disguised as favors. No sudden transfers just this once. No emotional debts waiting to be collected. The absence felt strange but not hollow. It felt earned. A few weeks into the new year, Rachel emailed to officially close my file. Her message was short, professional, almost understated. "All matters resolved. No further action required. I'm glad you chose yourself." I read that line twice. Chose yourself. For most of my life, that phrase had sounded selfish. Something people said when they were done caring about others. Now I understood it differently. Choosing yourself wasn't about abandoning anyone. It was about refusing to abandon your own reality. Around the same time, my mother called again. She was still staying with her sister. She sounded calmer, lighter. "I've been sorting through old things," she said. "I'm realizing how much I gave up without ever deciding to." I listened. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she admitted. "But I know I can't go back to pretending." I didn't offer advice. She didn't ask for it. We talked about small things instead. Books she used to love, places she never visited, dreams she had once described as impractical. When we hung up, I sat quietly thinking about how control doesn't always look like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like years of quiet persuasion that trains you to believe you don't get to choose. That winter, Evergreen Holdings officially closed its office. I heard about it through someone else, the way news travels when you're no longer central to the story. There was no satisfaction in it, just confirmation. Systems built on illusion don't survive reality for long. My father didn't reach out again. And eventually I realized something else. I didn't miss him. I missed the idea of a father who saw me as a person instead of a resource. I missed the version of family I had hoped would exist if I tried hard enough. Once I let go of that hope, the grief loosened its grip. Spring came early that year. I started taking long walks after work, letting the city soften around me. I said yes to invitations without checking my phone first. I booked a trip I'd been postponing for years because there was always something more important to pay for. On that trip, sitting alone in an unfamiliar place, I caught my reflection in a window and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. She stood straighter. She wasn't scanning the room for approval. She looked present. One evening, months later, I opened the old wooden box my mother had sent me and read through the letters again. Generations of women navigating expectations, quietly sacrificing without witnesses, believing that endurance was the same thing as love. I closed the box gently. That pattern ended with me, not through confrontation, not through punishment, but through refusal. Refusal to keep paying for belonging. Refusal to confuse silence with peace. Refusal to let love be conditional on obedience. If there is one thing I learned through all of this, it is this. People who benefit from your lack of boundaries will always call you cruel when you set them. They will say you changed. They will say you became cold. They will say you chose money pride or independence over family. What they really mean is that you chose yourself over control. And that is the one choice they can't forgive because it takes their power away. I didn't win anything tangible in the end. No inheritance, no apology tour, no public redemption. What I gained was quieter and far more permanent. I gained the right to make decisions without fear. I gained mornings that belong to me. I gained a life that doesn't require permission. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself somewhere in my story, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not difficult for wanting fairness. You are not selfish for saying no. You are not wrong for stepping back when the cost of staying is your dignity. Boundaries are not punishment, they are protection. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop being useful to people who only love you when you comply. If this story resonated with you, if you've lived a version of it yourself, take a moment, like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe if you want to hear more stories about reclaiming power, dignity, and truth. Because silence may keep the peace for a while, but choosing yourself is how you finally get your life back.